Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for Compliance and Best Practices P2 for Metal Fabrication and Finishing. I see a lot of familiar names that signed up, and we appreciate you joining us this morning. Just real quick, who are we? Probably most of you know that we are with Kansas State University. We are through the College of Engineering and Engineering Extension. Engineering Extension has three main groups: our Kansas and National Radon Program, our Kansas Energy Program, and of course, Pollution Prevention Institute, which all of our panel speakers today are with the Pollution Prevention Institute, or PPI. We just celebrated 30 years of our institute just last year, and we have a small video on our website if you want to check it out. Under PPI, we have the Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, which assists small business with environmental compliance and permitting. We also have the Pollution Prevention Program that's been around since 2006. All of our programs are grant funded. We get money from KDHE for our Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, and our Pollution Prevention Program, which is paying for this free workshop today, is from EPA grants. Next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce our speakers today. Most of you know Nancy Larson. She is our director, and she's in a Wichita office. That's me with shorter hair. I've been with PPI for 4 years, and when I started, my hair was really short. And I am right now in Topeka. Lena DeVacher and Arthur Fink are in Manhattan in our Unger Complex off-campus office. And Allison Crowther is in Shawnee, Kansas. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of why we're here today, why we wanted to present a workshop for metal fabricators and finishers. Every 2 years, EPA's P2 program issues national emphasis areas. That's what this NEA stands for. And so for 2020 through 2022, not 21, EPA has 5 national emphasis areas that they're concentrating on for P2, or to promote pollution reduction activities at these sources. Right now, 3 of them are kind of what we're talking about today. Metal fabricators that have NAICS 331 and 332 are one of the national emphasis areas. And we've invited aerospace and automotive, like automobile manufacturers and auto shops, to participate because they are also one of the national emphasis areas. And they have a lot of the same activities as the metal fabricating folks have. This, under 331, 332, this number, 60,000, is only the facilities in the United States nationwide that have to report to TRI. They only represent 7% of all TRI reporters, and they don't represent all of the metal manufacturers in the United States. This number is only a percentage, right? Because not everybody is reporting for TRI. But just some quick data about releases from facilities that do report to TRI that are in your industry type. There are approximately 4,434 industries that are reporting to TRI that are in the metal manufacturing and fabricating industry. And so you can see here they're managing 3.3 billion pounds of waste annually. And down here you can see, the breakdown of on-site and off-site disposal or other releases into the environment. And today we're going to be concentrating on those. We're going to be talking about releases into the air, into the water, hazardous waste and other waste releases. And so that is what this workshop is going to be focusing on. Next slide, please. This slide again is national information. It shows you your industry's practices and releases. So in waste management approaches, you can see here really big numbers on recycling. Recycling is not P2, but it is an important management practice. We don't want to see our precious metals and our natural resources, like steel, going to the landfill, right? So recycling that is essential. And then the smaller amounts are, disposal or other releases. So these might be landfill disposals. Energy recovery is a really tiny fraction of a waste management approach in your industry type. Over here are total releases, and we can see that off-site disposal is a fairly large portion, and some of that really is in the recycling area. So again, it matches up with this information. And we have on-site air releases that are down here. These numbers, they're not that large, which is a good thing. On-site land disposal and on-site surface water discharges. Arthur and Lena are going to talk about the water end of things today, and we'll delve into that. It's really important. Next slide, please. All right, I want to introduce our first speaker today, Nancy Larson, and she's going to talk about waste management. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Linnell, for that really good introduction to this industry sector. This is really important because, as Linnell just explained, this industry sector is one of 5 national emphasis areas and that EPA has identified. And that means they see your sector as having a lot of opportunity for better waste management, better emission management reduction. And that is our goal today, is to give you some ideas about how can you reduce your emissions, how can you reduce your waste, how can you save money and reduce your regulatory burden. So today, I recommend that you listen, and if you hear us say something, you jot it down so that you can either ask a question, follow up at your facility, and make sure that you're catching some of the tips we're going to give you today. Now, with that said, we are going to be talking to you, as Linnell explained, about several different medias. I'm talking to you about waste management, and we've got a very short time today. So what we're going to be doing is pretty much giving you a fire hose approach at all of this. We don't have time to go into detail. I could talk about this topic for an hour, but I've only got about 10 or 15 minutes. So definitely take note to some of the topics that sound like, ooh, this could be a problem at my facility. Maybe we use that. Should I look into that? And with that, I'll just say, as Linnell said, I did not introduce myself, but I'm Nancy Larson. I am the director, and I've been in a Wichita office about 21 years because was an experiment to open a non-campus office. So that's why I'm here in Wichita, Kansas, and I work with a lot of different metal fabricators. So next slide, please. All right, so today I'm talking about the waste media. And to use your time efficiently, we want to focus on what is likely the most problematic and expensive waste for you to manage, and that's hazardous waste. As you likely know, hazardous waste is federally regulated under RCRA, or the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. In about the 1980s, KDHE took primacy for these regulations, and so they are the regulatory authority. And in fact, RCRA and hazardous waste is probably the strictest enforced regulation across the country. So that means if you're going to see an inspector, you're more than likely to see an inspector from KDHE Bureau of Waste Management. So we're also going to touch on what are your most problematic waste streams. So I want to give you some ideas on that with regard to hazardous waste. What are your regulatory obligations? And then what are the opportunities? Where are those opportunities for reducing or eliminating some waste streams? And then some resources. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start with these potential waste streams. As you can see, I have broken these up into 3 different processes, kind of looking at, you know, your metal preparation process, which of course is so important, your painting and coating process, and then your cleanup process, which is probably the area where you generate the most hazardous waste. So those are kind of, you can read the slide there, blasting solvents. Sometimes some of these chemical waters, those are the wastes that you might generate in metal prep. In painting and coating, it might be some gun cleaners, it might be spent paint solvent waste, or expired inventory, which is really a problem, right? Because you paid for that kit coming in, it sat on the shelf, you did not use it, and then you paid for it going out the door. So we definitely want to look. That's a low-hanging fruit that really needs to be addressed if you think that's a problem at your facility. And then cleanup, all kinds of different solvents that you use, paints mixed with those solvents from the cleanup process. Sometimes you've got sludges, and although the water that goes that you may use in your 3 or 5 stage washer, if you have one, that goes and is regulated by the Clean Water Act. Sometimes you've got sludges that you've got to dig out of those washers, and those have to be analyzed for hazardous waste. Paint contaminated materials, right? Are your filters, your rags, your masking, your PPE, are they hazardous waste? Well, the answer is sometimes if you're using RCRA metals like chromium in your paints. And then there's that other category. And in that other category, I'm not going to touch on that much. Those are not hazardous waste as long as you are managing them properly. So take a look at that. None of those are hazardous waste. And if you're managing hazardous waste, you could save some money. So please launch the first poll. And this poll is asking you, what are your most problematic waste streams? It's a multiple choice. So please vote. Is it solvent paint waste? Is it expired inventory, spent blast waste, or none of these? Give it 5 more seconds. So it looks like about half of you have voted. Okay, excellent. All right, please launch the results. Sharing the results, it is solvent paint waste. And then second behind that is spent blast waste. Let me take just a second. You can end that poll, and you can stop sharing it by clicking on your screen and Xing it out in case it hung up in front of your screen. But let me talk about blasting waste, right? So blasting waste, the media itself is typically not a problem, but during the process of blasting, it might pick up some heavy metals. And then the spent blast waste needs to be analyzed to determine if it's hazardous waste or not. The other problem comes in when you're not containing it. So when you've got those little bead blast boxes, it's well contained within your box. But when you've got large parts, which most of you do, and you're blasting those, you need to make sure that you're not doing that out in the parking lot, or if you're doing it in a garage with the garage door up, that blast cannot be leaving the property. That would be hazardous waste on your property. That could increase your liability and be a major cleanup. When it comes to solvent waste, there's lots of ways to control that by, and we're going to talk about that, changing the material, technology, and process. Next slide, please. Okay, your compliance obligations. So first of all, training is the place to start, you guys. So you all are hazardous waste generators. And so anyone handling hazardous waste has to be trained within 6 months of taking the position, and then has to have an annual refresher. So those are all the folks who are dumping waste into the drum. Those are the environmental managers like yourself who should know pretty much the full scope of the regulations and what is required. And those are people certainly signing the manifest. Training is very, very important, and you have to document it in Kansas. They will ask you about your training records. We do have an online training curriculum. It costs $30. You can take it You can take it anytime, and it does give you a certificate of training. That needs to be complemented with some on-site training. The next thing is determinations, hazardous waste determinations. Those can be really confusing for hazardous waste generators, and we will be happy to help you with that. But what you have to do is fill out one of these documents for each hazardous waste stream you have. And there are some waste streams at your facilities that you may think are hazardous, but are not. Or by doing some waste segregation and determining, you could actually take them out of the hazardous waste stream. And we are good at helping you with that, and we would be happy to help you do that if needed. So you do the determinations, and then once you do the determinations, you figure out how much do I generate every month. That's quantification. So the quantification, how much you generate each month, identifies your generator category. And you have some obligations with regard to your generator category. And there are 4 categories. May I have the next poll, please?
Nancy, you have 10 minutes or so.
Thank you. Okay, so this category says, what are your most problematic waste streams? And oh, excuse me, that was the last one. Yep, here we want to go to waste session number 2 poll, please. There we go. Now we're asking, what is your hazardous waste generator status? There are 4 categories. Small quantity generators, the one that's just coming up. There are Kansas generators, and then CESQG is conditionally exempt small quantity generator. And then some of you may be large quantity generators. Okay, please show the poll results. Right, looks like the majority of you are SQGs. SQGs generate more than 220 pounds a month, or a half a drum approximately, but less than 4 drums a month, or 2,200 drums a month. And that's what I would suspect. So that's a lot of hazardous waste at your facilities. And you can close that poll result, remember, if it's in front of your screen, by just Xing it out. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so depending on your generator category, SQGs have more compliance requirements than Kansas small quantity generators. And so those relate to container management, your weekly or monthly inspections, record keeping, and emergency management. Next slide, please. So where's the money? How can we help you save money? How can we help you reduce waste? It is really important to be able to sell top management by making the business case for reducing waste. Because if you reduce waste, you're reducing your hazardous waste disposal costs, right? Which can be pretty expensive. What can also be very expensive is if you're reducing your waste through process efficiency, you could be reducing raw material. And a lot of times your paints or coatings are very expensive. That can reduce labor and have a trickle-down effect even to utilities. Also, looking at regulatory burden. If you reduce your waste, you might be able to go from a small quantity generator down to that Kansas generator level. That can greatly reduce what you're required to do. It reduces weekly inspections to monthly inspections, for example. Not to mention your liability, because remember, RCRA is cradle to grave responsibility. So if you're generating and sending less hazardous waste out the door, you're reducing your long-term environmental liability, not to mention the time it takes to stay in compliance. So those are some of your greatest opportunities right there. And then when we look at this pie chart in the middle, what we see here, these are source reduction or pollution prevention activities that these large companies, the TRI emitters, only 7% of your industry sector, are reporting. But we can learn from them because we know that 47% is just from good housekeeping. And you guys, you know what good housekeeping is? It is training your people to manage waste properly. It's as simple as making sure things are labeled, they are organized, people know where to dump hazardous waste. It's as simple as clearly identifying your processes so your technicians know how much paint does it take to paint this part, so they're not taking extra and then wasting it, right? How do we clean in an efficient way our gun lines? It's as simple as that. And that crosses over to process modification, which is the next thing. And process can be as simple as having a dedicated paint booth. If you're using chrome in your primers, maybe you've got a dedicated paint booth for that chrome painting process, because then you know everything in that paint booth is going to be RCRA hazardous. Whereas if you don't have chrome or some of the RCRA heavy metals, the other paint booth, you may have your filters and your masking and some of those things, they are going to be solid waste. And so if you look at the chart then on the right-hand side, the source reduction activities by chemical, you can see that chromium, that heavy metal, and some other metals there that you use in your industry, those are where some of the big opportunities are from a chemical aspect. So if I've said something that raises a red flag, be sure you're taking notes and checking on that, and then email us if you have a question. So next slide, please. Waste minimization tips. So what you see here is a really simple, what we call a really simple P2 mantra. When we go in and we want to identify some waste minimization tips for facilities or pollution prevention tips, we look at change the material, change the process, change the technology. We try to keep it really, really simple so it's not complicated. But when we say change the material, what do I mean by that? Well, if you're using a solvent like trichloroethylene, or we call TCE, or maybe you're using 100% xylene or toluol, something like that, do you need to use 100%? Can you have a less toxic solvent? Do you need to clean all of those parts, right, with that solvent, or can some parts be cleaned with something that's non-hazardous? Painting and coating, again, look at those RCRA metals. Can you change to a powder process instead of a wet process? And then cleanup. Then when it comes to change the process in painting and coating, when you're painting, I'm certain you are painting all the same color at once and minimizing your color changes, because that can generate a lot of extra waste if you are not systematic about that. And when it comes to technology, it can be as simple as making sure you've trained your people and you're using an HVLP gun. And realize that some of these same things, they're going to transfer over, and you're going to hear Linnell mention some of these same things for air quality, because they not only have an air implication, they also have a waste implication. Next slide, please. All right, so it's time for me to wrap up, and I really appreciate people participating today. And although Allison is going to share with you several resources, I wanted to pull out some of these local resources. So KDHE Bureau Waste Management Generator Handbook is really important. That's our Hazardous Waste Generator Handbook. And in fact, if you do go through our K-State training, we will ask you to download and use that handbook as part of the training. And then there's all kinds of technical guidance documents. And if you've worked with me in the past, I provided you with several. They specialize in how do you do a determination? What is hazardous waste? How do I handle my solvent contaminated wipers? All those types of things. So if you have questions about that, let us know and we'll get you a technical guidance document. And then on our website for hazardous waste, we have in addition to our training, we have a great video that Arthur worked on container management. Excellent video to use as training at your facility. We also are the group that works with KDHE, and again, all of our materials are KDHE approved. But we've got this generator compliance calendar that many of you have, and it's on our website. We also have a hazardous waste determination app, which is undergoing some updates right now. So to wrap it up, I wanted to say I've touched on many different compliance and waste minimization topics in about the last 10 or 15 minutes here. If you need any more detail or have questions on these topics, because I did give them to you pretty quickly, please feel free to chat your question or send us an email. And right now, I'll turn it back over to Linnell.
Thanks, Nancy. That was great. It's me again, and I'm going to talk to you about ambient air quality. I have about 20 years of experience in ambient air quality. Some of you might know me from KDHE. Actually, I was a permit writer for 10 years in the Bureau of Air, and I was an air inspector in Southeast Kansas covering those 16 counties. And like I said earlier, I've been with K-State PPI for 4 years this week. So I'm coming to this with a lot of experience and background. As Nancy said, we're kind of fire hosing you guys, but you know, hopefully it'll trigger some things that you have questions about, and then you will contact us and we can provide that technical assistance after this workshop. So please keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, back to this national number. You know, this again is just a small percentage of your industry type that reports to TRI. So we're looking at those 7% out of the total in this country, you know, are reporting, and that's almost 24,000 tons of air emissions. So what are we talking about? Air emissions, volatile organic compounds, which are a concern because they contribute to the formation of ground level ozone, hazardous air pollutants. These are a concern because they're toxic, they're carcinogens, they are teratogens. They can get into, from the air into our water. I don't know if any of you are fishermen or anything, but I love to fish. It kind of gives me nightmares that when it rains, the rain washes all the air pollutants into our soil, into our waters, and then, you know, if the fish eat the little paramecium or the little amoeba, then that gets, you know, if it's a bioaccumulating chemical, then that gets into the fish. And that's kind of why we have all these warnings in Kansas about limiting the amount of fish that you eat from our streams. Mercury is one of the biggest pollutants, but so you have these VOCs and HAPs. And if you look at the wheel over here, you're going to see some familiar names, certain glycol ethers. This is a big one that confuses people because they're hazardous air pollutants. There's some of them that are exempt on the hazardous air pollutant list, and it's not easy to identify the ones that are subject because on the list, there isn't a chemical assigned number. You know, there's not a CAS number for these glycol ethers. So you have to really do the research. If you have any products with them, you know, feel free to contact me and let me know, and I'll help you identify whether those glycol ethers have to be reported as a HAP for your permitting or your emissions, or if they're exempt. Xylene's a big one we see in your industry. We see toluene. This is just, like I said, you know, a national look at things. So we're talking about VOC HAPs, non-HAP VOCs. So yes, some VOCs are not HAPs, and some HAPs are not VOCs. So, you know, it takes a little bit to try to figure those things out. Also, that gets reported to TRI that may not be reported as an emission in your facility, or other chemicals like I pulled out carbonyl sulfide here. It is, you know, found in aluminum production. So like secondary aluminum production where somebody's bringing in pop cans and then they're melting those down. You're going to get some other pollutants or other required reporting. Next slide, please. Let's do a poll real quick, though. This question is, what are your biggest air emission concerns? Just take a few minutes to read through that and see if any of those fit your concerns. All right, it looks like half of you've answered. So I'll go ahead and end the polling real quickly and share the results. So it looks like most people are concerned about understanding applicable regulations. Understandably, there are a lot of federal regulations that apply to your industry type. I'm going to talk about it here in a minute, the NAICS and the MAICS. I'm not going to get into great detail. I want you to know that we do have some assistance tools, some guidance documents. We have emission calculating tools on our website. You know, those are free for anyone to access and use. You know, 4W, 6X, 6H, 4M. We have all of that guidance on our website, and those are the main major NAICS that apply, because, you know, if you're area source of hazardous air pollutants or a major source of hazardous air pollutants, those MACs and those NAICS are going to apply. Being inspection ready, I totally understand, because I was an inspector. And ways to reduce VOCs and HAPs. Yes, this is important, especially the HAPs, because VOCs have such a high threshold. You're not a major source unless you're emitting over 100 tons per year, potential to emit of VOCs. You are a major source, however, if even one of the chemicals you use, like toluene, for instance, or xylene, if you have a PTE over 10 tons per year for that one HAP, you are a major source, and it sends you into other permitting categories for operating permits and things like that. And I'll be glad to talk with anyone after the workshop about these requirements. You know, a lot of, you know, if you have an operating permit, many of you may have some permit restrictions that limit the amount of paintings or solvents that you can use on a 12-month rolling basis. These are chemicals that are of concern, as Nancy talked about, you know, because of ignitability, for employee safety. They can also be health hazards because HAPs are, again, carcinogens and cause health effects. Your best practice, get those safety data sheets from your manufacturer and understand what the constituents are in your chemicals. Also, if your manufacturer has environmental data sheets, man, those, if you have never seen one of those, get one. If your manufacturer produces them or writes them up for the chemicals that they sell to you, because they help you understand those HAP constituents, those VOC constituents, a lot easier than sometimes it's a lot clearer in those EDS than it is in the SDS, especially even like just CERCLA and right to know and all that reporting requirements are in there too, and TRI information. So if you can identify products that are low or no VOC or HAP, you know, we recommend acetone a lot because it is not a VOC and it is not a HAP. Now, if you end up with, at the other end of your process, a lot of that as waste, then it could, you know, impact your hazardous waste generation. If you have to use a lot more acetone than what you would of toluene, let's say, maybe toluene's more effective at removing paint if you're trying to strip paint from parts or something or clean up. But if you can use that acetone, it's going to alleviate or reduce your regulatory burden. The methyl ketones, MIK versus MAK or MEK. Methyl isobutyl ketone is a HAP and a VOC. So if you can stay away from it and use the MAK or the MEK, you know, if acetone doesn't work, that would be a better solution. Water-based paints, if you can go to that for the quality. I know a lot of times our concern is the quality of our products, right? And so it's important to our customers what the quality is. But if you can move towards water-based paints for certain parts or certain processes, you know, it helps just a little bit in that reduction. Changing the process altogether. We've worked with companies in your industry type moving from liquid paint to powder coating. Using those high volume, low pressure guns or electrostatic guns helps increase the paint getting onto the part rather than everywhere else. Proper painting training is important. Because again, getting the paint on the part, not on the paint booth filter or on the floor. It's really a good method to improve your operations and reduce the amount of product you're doing. Because remember, with air emissions, it's how much product you are using. Housekeeping,
Pinelli.
keep those containers closed.
Pinelli,
Next slide,
10 minutes
please.
sort of.
Yes, yes. Next slide, please. And plating, etching, anodizing, again, in this process, a lot of times we're looking at the heavy metals that are in your plating, etching, or anodizing processes. So there are NAICS and MAC rules that apply. Sometimes there's 12-month rolling limits that you'll get in an operating permit because of that. Like if you're doing chrome plating. Best practices is increase the drag out time. Make sure that your design of your tank flows, are preventing any drips between tanks. Closed tanks, especially heated ones, when they're not in use, prevent parts from getting into the tanks, because that's what makes the tanks dirty faster, and you have to change out. And then that could increase, what you're having to send down the drain. Also, change chemicals if you can. I do have some resource videos. This one is on a YouTube channel of our national SB YouTube channel. It is on 4W, which is for area sources that are doing plating and anodizing with chromium or chromates. This is a trade association presentation for EPA that is really great about P2 and plating. And I can provide these links to everyone later after the presentation. Next slide, please. Degreasing is another area. Nancy kind of talked about TCE, but in the past we've had PERC and other really hazardous chemicals, hazardous air pollutant chemicals used. So here again, you could be looking at VOCs and HAPs. What you want to go to is the low or no VOC HAP solvents if you can. Do cold degreasing versus heated or vapor if possible, because that's going to reduce your emissions. Total enclosure is another great way to contain those emissions and prevent them from being released. Water-based degreasing. I know that scares a lot of people working with metal, increasing rusting or whatever, but it is possible. Water-based degreasing or water-based cleaning is possible. They're doing it in California. I know California scares people because they are much more stringent than even EPA, but they're doing it out there and they're doing it successfully. Then there are some soy-based degreasers on the market, and so this would be a less hazard option. Next slide, please. Abrasive blasting. Again, Nancy kind of covered this. If you're using sand, and it could be, and if you're doing it outside, you could create respirable dusts, outdoor complaints, community complaints from doing it outdoors. There's NAICS and MAC rule that apply here if you're an area source. So your best practice here is to fully contain your blasting operations. I know it's hard when you have really large parts, but the more you can fully contain that, the more you're going to be controlling and preventing the release of any pollutants into the atmosphere or off the property. Changing your blast material choices, using materials that fracture less. Garnet is one, but I know it's very expensive, glass beads, or less hazardous nutshells. I know I've talked to a lot of you. Some of these things don't work because you need, maybe you need steel shot to get that job done, that pre-painting processing done. But you can always try. You can always try some less fracturing materials. Next slide, please. Combustion. It's kind of one of the forgotten ones. A lot of people know about it, but in your industry type, if you're painting, you may have a burn-off oven, you may have dryer ovens, you may have heat treating of your materials, you might have a wash booth, you might have a boiler, you might have an emergency engine. So these are going to be creating criteria pollutants like NOx, SO2 or SOx, CO, VOC, PM. And there are new source performance standards, that are applicable and NESHAP requirements for these type of equipment. And the biggest problem, the compliance concern I have routinely seen is the improper use of certain pieces of equipment here, where people are using a heat treat oven or a burn-off oven to dispose of, paint filters and other wastes. If you were permitted for a burn-off oven, it's for maybe your paint hooks only, and you should not be putting parts in there to refurbish. So, it's kind of a problem. Best practices here is, changing that energy source, going from, if you're using a liquid fuel like diesel to natural gas, or if you can go to electric, that is your best option. Resizing your burners for your process needs. There's a lot of times you see oversized boilers in use, oversized water heaters for wash booths. So you can make those assessments and changes. And then again, I've already mentioned the last one. Next slide, please. Welding, plasma, and laser cutting. I left this for last because, as you'll see over here in the column best practices, P2 in this area is the toughest challenge because your raw material contains manganese, nickel, sometimes chromium. Those are all in, your raw material that you're bringing in. Your welding rods, your welding wire also can contain those. So those emissions, those heavy metals coming from welding, they're particulates and they're fumes that contain HAPs. So, there are NESHAP MAC rules that could apply here if you're an area source. And, I'm glad to help anyone with this. A lot of times that recycle number is so high in your industry type because, it's hard. I know it is for you to be able to purchase your raw material, your flat sheets of metal coming in, or your rods, or your structural steel beams that are coming in. It's very hard for you to right size that from the manufacturer, from, the foundry, or whoever's whoever you're buying it from. But, if you can investigate that, that's a place to start. Then it reduces that recycling load on you. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. I want to turn it over to Arthur Fink, who's going to talk to you about water usage and wastewater.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it sitting in on yet another Zoom call. I'm sure everyone's probably getting pretty used to this by now. But as Linnell said, my name's Arthur Fink. I've been with PPI for getting close to 3 years now. And my background, I'm an bio and ag engineer from Kansas State University. But after graduation, I've worked in the environmental engineering field for the past 20 years in a number of different capacities. I've worked for KDHE, I've worked for consulting, and even did a stint for the Bureau of Land Management for a year up in Wyoming in the Powder River Basin. Can we go to the next slide? And speaking of the Powder River Basin, it's one of the reasons we were up there was I was up there was to deal with water, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today is water usage and wastewater. Basically, what's coming in the pipe and what's going out the pipe. And this is dealing strictly with the potable and processed water. My coworker Alina will be talking about stormwater after I finish with my presentation here. So basically, I'm going to start off with saying water conservation has a lot of benefits. Typically, folks, especially in the environmental industry, typically focus in on a lot of the environmental impacts that can be lessened by conserving water, by using water good without wasting. I'm sure, though, as facility owners, as facility environmental reps, you're looking at the bottom dollar most of the time. And cost savings, of course, are going to be a big draw to wanting to conserve water. And what are the typical uses of water at a metal fab and finishing shop? Well, you've got the front office, you've got, your sinks, your restrooms, maybe water fountain. You may have your irrigation system for your front flowers or your lawn area out front. That's one use. Then you've got cleaning and treating the metal. You've also got water that may be going into boilers to create steam possibly. You've got process and plating tanks. You've got coolant and lubricant for your machines. Basically anything that's going to discharge to the sewer or to a floor drain is something that's using water. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we determine how much water we're using? The best way to do this is to assess and analyze. And how we do that is to take a minimum of 12 months of your water bills. And we say 12 months so you can look at the seasonal fluctuations. I know just like in agriculture, manufacturing, there's peaks and valleys. There's sometimes when you're really busy and sometimes when you're not. And looking for an entire year will allow you to kind of see where some of those peaks and valleys may be. Once you kind of get an idea of the overall flow of water in your facility, then it's time to figure out exactly which processes are taking up the most water. One way to do this is to put in and install sub-metering. You've got the main meter on the outside of your facility that's measuring all the water going in. You can install smaller meters into your plumbing system as well to figure out how much is going to your front office or how much is going to your plating tanks. That's one way, but that's also can be a little bit of a pain and a little bit of an O&M issue to keep meters running. You can also just simply do the portable flow meter, or you can use a bucket and a stopwatch. We also recommend to take a look at those uses and then figure out, are there any abnormalities? Like, why am I wasting 8,000 gallons every night or every weekend? Oh, wait, somebody's not shutting off the valve. Or, you know, wait a second, this machine is running. We could maybe shut it off and we won't waste as much water. It's a lot easier to track that usage when you get everything kind of broken down. If we could go on to the next slide. There are some ways to reduce your water that involve more than just going around and looking at leaks, although leaks is always what we call low-hanging fruit. It's amazing how just one drip every 5 seconds can add up to thousands of gallons at the end of the year. And you figure, well, one drip, that's not too bad. But if you go around, you really look at things, you'll notice a lot of times that there's a lot of drips. You know, Teflon tape and tightening the piping is you know, when it's put together is always, you know, usually how the plumbers do it. But every so often you need to go back, and vibrations and things will unseat those seals. But in addition to those fixes, we also have some other ideas. You can recycle your wash bay water by settling and decanting it, making sure that any grit or sand or solids fall out, and then decanting it by making sure that all the oil or any other lighter types of petroleum products get skimmed off the top. You could reuse that water again and again. In rural areas, we could also reuse the gray water. Not the toilet water, but the stuff that comes out of the sink or maybe comes out of the washing machine if you've got uniforms. That type of stuff, water is obviously not potable, not good for drinking, but you can use it on the bushes or the lawn out front. You can also collect rainwater from your roof, and I know Lena will talk about that a little bit more, but you can use that water and introduce that in to reduce the amount of potable water that you're having to pipe into your facility. And then finally, the use of flow restrictors, timers, and automatic valves. If you guys have a locker room, a lot of times either the hand sink or the urinal, maybe just on a continual trickle basis, you can put an automatic valve on that, and they're not that expensive. You can go down to, you know, the True Value or the Lowe's and pick one up for, you know, probably under 50 bucks, install it, and you will save that money back very quickly. So these are some of the ideas, briefly talking about the water coming in. Let's talk about the water going out now. If we could go to the next slide. All right. Wastewater. It's obviously a big issue for a lot of facilities, especially those of you that have plating tanks or use large baths or treatment processes. Basically, the Clean Water Act is what regulates all that water that goes out of the pipe. And the Clean Water Act, which is a big federal law, kind of much like the Clean Air Act that Linnell just talked about and all of its parts and pieces. Well, the Clean Water Act, its major part and piece that does its regulatory lifting is called the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES. And NPDES permits are required for all direct dischargers of wastewater, and some industries which are categorically identified have specific analytical and reporting requirements. And metal finishing and fabrication is no different than a lot of other facilities that have very specific requirements. As you can see, the chart on the right lists all of the different types of metal and manufacturing, forming, milling, that the EPA looks at and the Clean Water Act looks at and says, wait a second, we know you're doing these processes. We need to make sure we're monitoring for certain pollutants that are coming out the backside of your facility. And just to touch on this briefly, the way that wastewater is regulated, at the federal level, of course, you have the EPA, which in Kansas, our local regional office is in Lenexa, Kansas. It's Region 7. Then underneath the EPA, you have KDHE. And then underneath that, there's a lot of times a local entity. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. But a local entity could be a municipality, could be a county, it could be a consortium of counties or municipalities. But there's 3 levels, and all 3 levels can act independently of each other in enforcing the same rules. Now, it's not that you will get double stung by any of these things, but any one of these entities can show up and do an inspection at any time. So just to let you know, EPA doesn't necessarily have to coordinate with KDHE or the locals in order to show up at a facility to look at a permit. So if we could go to the next slide, and if we could also bring up the first poll. And basically what this first poll will be is, do you know if your facility has a pre-treatment permit with the city for your wastewater? So if you guys could check one of those 3 boxes, and let me know here. And I'll kind of explain here why I'm asking that particular question. If your facility is located in one of the 18 municipalities, okay, it looks like we've got a few that aren't sure, and some that are no. Basically, if your facility is in one of 18 municipalities, a KDHE approved pre-treatment program, then your facility must work with that municipality to make sure that any NPDES and local requirements are met. Basically, what the KDHE has said is that, okay, let's take the city of Wichita, for example. Wichita, you've got a big enough wastewater treatment program that you can run this pre-treatment program for us. Now, it's going to have the same requirements plus any additional ones that Wichita may have, but they will be the ones to basically administer this permit for you. Now, if we could go to the second poll question.
Arthur, it's
Yes.
10 minutes now.
Okay, thank you. Do you know if your facility has a direct NPDES permit? And if we could get some of the folks to answer that, and I'll talk about it while we're waiting for the results. In rural areas or in municipalities which do not have an approved pre-treatment program by KDHE and EPA, then KDHE will issue an NPDES pre-treatment permit to industries that are subject to the promulgated pre-treatment standards, i.e. metal manufacturing and finishing. Basically what that means is that even if you aren't in a pre-treatment area, you still need to contact KDHE so they can go through and administer these pre-treatment standards correctly, because the local authorities will not have that authority. If we could go to the next question, or next slide, sorry. All right, so what do these permits, pre-treatment permits and NPDES permits mean? Well, they go through and basically say what they expect to see possibly in your wastewater, what you need to sample for, when you need to sample for it, and when you need to report those sample findings to either the EPA or to KDHE or to the local municipality that has the pre-treatment program. And for those of you who are doing just basic cutting and welding of bare steel, you're probably going to have to look at total suspended solids and oil and grease in your wastewater. For those of you that do faucetizing, parkerizing, passivation, bluing, those types of things, you're probably going to have to look at pH phosphorus, nitrates, and a list of metals in your wastewater. And for those of you that specifically do plating and anodizing, you're going to have to look for pH, metals, and cyanides in your wastewater. If we could go to the next slide. As those are the analytes that I just went over, that would be in an NPDES or a pretreatment permit. But I'd like to say a few things about those permits, both the NPDES permits and the pretreatment permits. They are a legal binding contract. It's not something that you just get and you put in your drawer. Please don't do that. Read the entire permit, understand what it says, and abide by the terms and conditions. Make sure that you're fulfilling all the reporting requirements on time. If there's a quick way to get an inspector or a nasty letter from the regulator, it's not fulfilling your requirements or obligations. And the biggest thing that I can let people know is never, never lie on your reporting. There's been a number of instances here in the state of Kansas where municipal wastewater treatment operators have had shortages of staff or have had incidents happen where they weren't able to collect their daily samples that they needed to. Well, they've gone back and just kind of carried over the numbers from the previous day. Well, it may seem like, you know, in mountains of data, like that's not a big you know, thing to do, but it's basically lying. And the EPA, KDHE, local pretreatment programs have zero tolerance for that. So it's better, almost always better, to fall on the sword and say, listen, we didn't get this sample taken, or we don't know what's going on here, than to lie. Problems can be worked out. When you lie, that's committing a crime, and we really can't help you a whole lot in that instance. But if something's wrong, then if you need assistance, you can always contact us. You can contact the Surface Technology and Environmental Resource Center. I've got their link here on this page. They've got some wonderful calculators for figuring out rinse tanks, volumes. Then, of course, the EPA has some websites as well. And lastly, I'd like to go up to that last bullet point up there under quick reminders when it comes to wastewater and permits. As Nancy and Linnell have both said, you can change your process, you change your material, change your technology to reduce your overall wastewater treatment, sampling, and disposal costs and regulatory burden. There are ways to do it. We'd be happy to help you research those. And with that, I would like to turn things over to my coworker, Lena, who will talk about industrial stormwater. Thank you all very much.
Good morning, everybody. So let's talk about the other water, the industrial stormwater, compliance and benefits. And I am Lena Divakar, and I work along with Arthur at our Manhattan office. And I have a background in bachelor's in agriculture engineering and integrated water resources management. And I mainly work on the water quality and water regulations. Thank you. Next slide, please. So Arthur touched on the NPDES regulations, but I would like to say a little more about it. So mainly the Federal Water Pollution Control Act amendments created the Clean Water Act, which created the NPDES permit program. So what does it contain? NPDES permit, it contains the limits on what you can discharge. It contains the monitoring and reporting requirements and other provisions to ensure that the discharges does not hurt water quality or people's health. So now we know what NPDES is. Let's talk about the stormwater. So it's not the water which we put in or the water we take out, but it is the water that is generated from rain or snowmelts, which creates this runoff and then picks up trash and pollutants on its way to the lake streams and oceans. Anyway, so now NPDES permit regulates this stormwater discharges mainly from three potential sources. So one is the MS force, the construction activities, and the industrial activities. So today we'll be focusing on the industrial activities, and we know that operators of these activities might be required to obtain an NPDES permit before they discharge stormwater. Next slide, please. So now you know the NPDES permit and stormwater, so you must be wondering whether your facility requires an industrial stormwater permit. So EPA developed this permitting regulations under NPDES to control stormwater discharges that is associated with 11 categories of industrial activity. So obviously, metal facilities fall under that, and it is described under the Standard Industrial Code, or known as SIC Code, Major Group 33. So like my colleagues already talked about, we know the primary metal facilities, they deal with steel works, rolling, finishing mills. We have blast furnace work going on, and iron and steel foundries going on, smelting work. So these create these major pollutants, which I have listed here. And it might be the oil, grease, diesel, your total suspended solids, your COD, ammonia, cyanide, cadmium, etc., etc. So, you know, these are your major pollutants from the industrial source. Next slide, please. So here I have listed the activity and the pollutant source. So you can see, I apologize if the font size is a little small, but I will say that the activity associated with the pollutant source, the major storage and handling which you do in your yard, and what happens is, like, mainly you store scrap metals or wires or that are coated with oil, and you store it outside, and it comes in contact with the stormwater, and the runoff carries the pollutants which you do not want. And also your activities that happens other than vehicle and equipment, fueling maintenance, there's leak occurring there, waste managed handling like Nancy talked about again, and you might have some losses happening. You might have some materials that fly off, and then there are rolling and casting and finishing operations, and there is exposure to wastewater. You do not, even though you have a permit, you do not want the wastewater to come in contact with your stormwater. And also you have other activities that are happening in the yard, which might create soil erosion. And you also do have illicit discharges that happens because if there is improper connection of floor, sink, and other things there. So I would like to launch the poll question. Let's see how many of you are in the process of stormwater compliance or already have it. So we'll take a few seconds there. So I have described this, whether you end up stage of NOI, that's notice of intent, or NOI and NOI-EC. So I'll talk about it a little more. Let's see the poll results, please. So I guess my presentation is important then. Some of you I can see are on the process of completing it, but now I will go ahead and close your poll. Next slide, please. So now you can see that how you can be in compliance, right? So I will explain to you in 6 simple steps. So first thing you have to do is to identify your SIC code. So once you have the SIC code of your facility, you have to compare that SIC code with the codes or narratives that is listed in the general permit document. And that document is housed at KDH website. And once you're done with that, you file for your notice of intent. And what is notice of intent? Is this? It's just request or authorization to discharge stormwater and some specifically identified non-stormwater discharges. So once you are done with your NOI, well, you will have to pay an amount of $60 for that, and then that's per year. And then the most important thing you can consider is the NOEC, or it's called the non-exposure certification. And once you have the what this non-exposure certification, you can apply for it if you have taken steps to ensure that there is condition of non-exposure at your facility. So it's the one important thing. And the thing is that once you do your NOI, you get your NOIC, then you're done. But in case you do not qualify for the NOEC, you have to go for the SW P2 plan, known as the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, and finally file the plan. That's it, easy, right? Well, if you are in a municipality or something, then you have to obviously contact the municipality and let them know about this. So next slide, please. So we discussed about the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. Now let me tell you what are the main elements of the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. So the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, it's just a written document that identifies potential sources of stormwater pollution at your industrial facility. So first thing you have to have is to create a stormwater pollution prevention team, and in that you would have the name of the people, the title, and the individual responsibility. You need a site description, just a map of the facility, maybe you can do with a Google map or something, and then you have to identify where your water comes in, the receiving water and the water that goes out. And then you have what summary of pollution of summary of potential pollutant list. So you have to list your industrial activities and identify those potential spills or leaks that happens in your facility. Then you have the description of control measures. Here you have to note what structural or non-structural practices you do at your industry to control the stormwater pollution. And then you have your schedules and procedures, mainly your routine facility information, and your reporting procedures are what you write there. And then you have you will have to have the documentation to support any special eligibility consideration that based on your effluent limit guidelines. And then finally, certify for the SWP2 plan. That's it. Yeah. So next slide, please. So basically, you know, this stormwater pollution prevention plan also involves best management practices and good housekeeping. That is important. So you know that preventive maintenance you have to follow. If there is a repair, and you go ahead and do that, and if you have to maintain your equipment, and if you have to prevent your leaks, and if a leak happens, your response procedures, you know, go ahead and clean it up, wipe it up, and so that it does not come in contact with your rainwater. And then you do your regular inspections. Your employees should be trained. They should know where what is and who is responsible for what. And record keeping, this is very important. You have to keep your record updated. And identifying all non-stormwater discharges, sediment and erosion control. You have to know that where, how you can maximize the vegetative area or your landscaping or your grassland around your facility. That also helps in management of runoff, and again, you might have a structural or non-structural thing going on there. And then finally, you have to keep the whole thing SWP2 plan updated. So I would say that if you have more grass area, then it is more like you get to the runoff gets absorbed there, and there is less pollution that goes out of your facility.
1 minute, Lena.
So, yeah, thank you, Lanelle. So what you do is you have to keep it all within your facility and see that it does not go out. So that's a good best management practice. Next slide, please. So your approach, like we talked about to pollution prevention, is only put that rain in the drain, nothing else. So the most important step here, I would say, is that if you can ensure the condition of no exposure in your location, then that would be great. Like keep your bins and everything covered so that it does not come in contact. Keep everything stored inside, or build a build something so that it does not come in contact with snow or the rainwater. So the basic principle is you do not have to put it in the pipe in the first place itself, right? So, and another important thing I would also like to say is that if you can capture that rainwater at your facility whenever possible, or you can use it for your landscaping or washing or other activities, that is a great thing you can do. And please, please follow your pollution prevention plan. And mainly your takeaways from this would be minimizing your exposure, and you're protecting the water and the downstream users. You're reducing erosion. And with this, you're combining your controls. You are doing two things at the same time, you know, and that's a plus. And above all, like if you do like rainwater, you collect rainwater and use it for landscaping, you reduce your site operating cost, and thus minimizing your environmental impacts and creating a better image. So I guess that's towards the end of my presentation, but I have some resources for you. Next slide, please. This is just at the, where we have the general stormwater permit and all those documents, some of them mostly by KDHE. And EPA has a lot of documents on stormwater pollution prevention. And if you need any assistance, we are here, like my colleague said. So with that, thank you very much. Over to Allison, please.
All right, thanks, Lena. So I'm Allison Crowther. I've been with PPI for about 2 years now. My background is in chemical engineering. I actually originally got involved through the Pollution Prevention Intern Program. So I've been pretty heavily involved with P2 since then. And I'm going to be talking to you about a few general resources, more for some of those kind of P2 things, as far as largely reducing chemical usage or replacing with less harmful chemicals. So first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources available through the Toxics Release Inventory, or TRI. Just a little bit of background on that. It's a mandatory reporting program affecting a list of chemicals identified as having adverse human health or environmental effects for certain specified industries that are releasing some of those TRI chemicals above an established limit. So there's a lot of information available on the TRI database. We are mostly going to look at their P2 database, or their P2 search tool. And these links are all going to be available through this presentation will be posted later, but I did want to show you some of these things because there's a lot of information in TRI, and it's great, but it can be a little bit tricky to navigate. So I wanted to show you this real quick. So this is kind of the data homepage. We are mostly looking at the P2 search tool. Now I will give one kind of caveat here is they use a looser definition of P2 than you normally see, because it's basically if they see a reduction, so a lot of things that wouldn't normally be counted get included. Part of it, there's a recycling project on here, but there's also things like if someone had a higher than usual total release the previous year and then returned to normal, their system recognizes that as source reduction, even though it's not exactly. So that's just something to be aware of when you're looking through these, and just check on them a little bit. So you can search by industry sector, either by these broader groups, or you can search for individual NAICS. You can filter by what chemicals you're looking at, whether it's, are they under a certain regulation, or you can just search for any TRI chemical. You can narrow by time frame. You can look for certain parent companies, and you can also narrow by geography. So I've got one search up here that I'd already done for fabricated metals, 2017 through 2019. And these aren't super detailed case studies, so it's not going to tell you exactly how to do it, but it can at least kind of give you some ideas and a starting point, and you can see what people in your industry and comparable industries have been doing and get a little bit of validation as far as, is this likely to work for my industry? So For instance, you've got some examples here, like installation of pH controllers on rinses. Okay, so that's better control technique. That can be something to look into, or better drag out techniques for some of their processes. And then another thing they have available for kind of a quick overview of different industries is the P2 dashboard, industry sector dashboard. So just for example, if we looked at the metal manufacturing and fabrication, then we can get some just general TRI P2 data on that industry. You can look at releases by media, releases by chemical, chemicals by reported source reduction activities, and you can also narrow it by state. So we can look at some more Kansas specific data even. And then a little bit more specific resources. So if you are looking for replacement products, if you have something potentially harmful that you're looking for something safer, EPA has a couple resources. There's the Safer Choice Products list and the Safer Chemical Ingredients list. So both of these you can kind of search by what usage you're looking for. And what both of these are is basically it's EPA has their criteria for what makes it a safer choice product or a safer chemical ingredient. These are well researched and verified to meet those criteria. If you are looking for kind of some more general use products, Safer Choice can be a really good place to look. Sometimes if you're looking for something a little bit more specific, that you might not be looking for a formulated product, you might be looking for a certain chemical, that's where you would be more likely to go to the Safer Chemical Ingredients list. And again, you can search by product class. So let's say we want to look at solvents. A quick note, the legend is described further down on the page, but basically that green is this is thoroughly researched and we know that it meets our criteria. That kind of half green circle is we would like to get a little bit more data, but based on what we have, this meets our criteria. The yellow is this mostly meets our criteria. There are kind of some issues with it, but we still consider it one of the best in class for environmental and human health concerns, but this is potentially an area for more research and development of better alternatives. If you're looking at TCE specifically, we do have some resources posted on our website, including a recording of a TCE roundtable that we did last year. We will be hosting another one in January, and again, there's information posted on our website about that. Minnesota Technical Assistance Program is also a great resource for TCE alternatives. Minnesota is currently in the process of banning TCE, so they have a lot of resources to try and help people adapt. And then the last thing I want to just kind of touch on a little bit is environmental management systems. If you're not familiar with this, basically, it's a more proactive, comprehensive approach to environmental efforts and addressing your environmental impacts. It usually goes beyond compliance. So it's a process that usually involves setting environmental goals, establishing programs to meet them, ensuring employee awareness and participation, and monitoring progress. It can help you get more consistent compliance. Again, it's that more proactive approach to try and avoid these issues rather than respond when they come up. It can also help you get further environmental goals. So you might be able to reduce your raw material or some other chemical that you're using, or reduce your energy usage. Often results in better employee morale, partly because it's something positive they see their company doing, and partly because it's something they can be involved in. And for similar reasons, it can help your public image as well, which can be useful for marketing and that sort of thing. EPA has some really good resources on establishing an environmental management system if you don't already have one. And with that, I will pass it back to Linnell.
Thanks, Allison. Here we are at the end of the workshop. So now it's workshop questions and answers. Real quick, I'm going to pull up a final poll just to see how you're all feeling about, you know, any barriers that you have for P2 implementation and researching it at your facility. So if you take a quick second or two to answer that. It's multiple choice. So if more than one applies, let us know. And then if you have your own comment, you know, you can always send it to me privately in chat or email me after the workshop, and I'd be glad to give you a call and talk to you. All right, let's see what we've got. Couple more seconds. All right, gonna end the poll, share the results. Looks like time or personnel to research potential P2, and then money for projects. Right, we know right now that there has been a lot of concerns. COVID has created a lot of economic issues and problems. And not just that, there's, you know, a lot of times production is where the money goes first, right? And then secondary is anything else. Time or personnel for research, I would just like to, you know, reiterate again, you know, we have technical assistance available. Here are our names and our emails and our areas of expertise. And with that, please, you know, send me questions or open up your mics. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question.